Hello everyone! So it's really a very bad day today in Ontario. It's raining like dogs and cats. Uh, but thank you for joining us. I'm Emmanuel. I'm a veterinarian with quite an unusual area of expertise. I'm a diplomate of the European College of Animal Reproduction, focusing mainly on dog and cat reproduction. In North America, people often refer to veterinarians like me as stereogenologists. Maybe that's a term you've heard already. But definitely, I mainly focus on this very specific area. Quite unusual, isn't it? I'm a big believer. I really enjoy the opportunity that social media gives us to educate people in this field. And I often receive questions from cat breeders. They want to start breeding cats, but they're not really sure where to start from. They really want to have more information on what to look at on what they need to focus before breeding these cats. So that's why I decided to do um, this series of short webcasts focusing on what one needs to know before starting to breed cats. The first episode today will mainly focus on the essential things people need to know on the reproductive function of the queen and the tomcat, but we'll expand this topic in future webcasts that I will record here on Google+. So let's jump to my slides because I prepared some slides for you guys. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention it, but I'm sure you get it now. I'm French, and which basically means that I speak Franglish. So I'll do my best to make it as understandable as possible. But if I do some grammatical mistakes in English, please apologize. That's not my native language. Anyway, so let's kick it off and let's speak on feline reproduction and what anybody needs to know on the tomcat and the queen before breeding them. So it's going to be very short and sweet, but we will really focus on what I consider the key elements to focus on. The first question I often get is, okay, when do they become sexually mature? Which implies when can we start breeding them? So I'm sure you know that sexual maturity usually corresponds to puberty. And puberty in cats is usually reached around 6 months of age. This is when you will start finding spermatozoas in the testis of the male, and this is when you will start to see ovarian activity in the female. So ovarian activity, from a clinical standpoint, it will mean that your queen will exhibit sign of eats. So she will be in season. So she will start meowing, etc. And typically, when she's in season, you guys notice it very quickly. It's hard to miss. So, but did you know that when it comes to puberty, for sure it's around 6 months, but there are many different factors that can affect this onset of puberty. For instance, in female, body weight plays an important role. We know that queens usually reach puberty when they are about 85% of their adult body weight, because the body fat will send a kind of signal through an hormone we call leptin to tell the body basically it is time to start the reproductive activity. Date of birth is also something that can influence puberty in the queen. Typically, we say that queens can reach puberty between 4 months of age until 15 months of age. There's quite a big gap here. And the big gap here is related to one specificity of the feline species. They tend to respond to the intensity of light, of daylight. And we tend to say that we're going to discuss this a little bit more in a few slides. But typically, a queen should start her first season the spring following her birth. And that explains you why sometimes they can start as early as 4 months of age. The breed is also something very important that will clearly influence the onset of puberty. For instance, certain breeds tend to show the first signs of season very late in life. Best example, Persians. All Persians and affiliated breeds, they tend to be they tend to take more time to enter the reproductive their reproductive career. While on the other side, if you breed Orientals, if you breed Siamese, these breeds tend to be more precocious somehow, let's say. It's not uncommon for them to start very early their reproductive career and to start showing clinical signs and to start showing season very early in life. Social interaction could play a role as well. When queens are grouped out, it's not uncommon that when one is in season, she will influence the others around. Same thing when it comes to puberty. If you want to start puberty in a queen, putting her with other queens which already are in season can definitely help. But there's a downside to that. When social interaction might also play a role, is that if the queen is highly stressed, stress can inhibit the activity on the ovary or on the ovaries, so it can block the secretion of hormones on the ovaries that lead in fact to this estrous behavior. So as you can see, many factors can influence puberty. Those factors are quite the same in male, the weight, etc. One thing we know for sure is that typically in males, around 6 months of age, we should find sperm in the testis. It can take a little more longer in Persian again, but it's important to make a clear difference here. Puberty in males doesn't mean the same thing than ability to breed. It's not because a male has sperm already in his testis at 6 months of age that he's already able to properly breed. There's a behavioral component here for sure, but it's important to keep in mind as well that the first ejaculates very often are the semen quality in them is very poor. You have low motility, low number of sperm, lots of abnormal sperm. So if you breed a male too early, just around 6 months, and there's no litter or the queens are not pregnant, etc., it might be related to the fact that the sperm quality is not optimal yet. And it's important to wait a little bit. Typically in males, we shouldn't start breeding them before a year of age. This is when we will start to have optimal semen quality. Be aware that in Persians, it can take up to 2 years before they are able to produce normal sperm quality. So again, the breed factor is really important here. Whatever happens, as you can understand, puberty is not the time when to start the breeding career in cats. In male, we already discussed the fact that the semen quality cannot be optimal right at the time of puberty. And in female, it's really important to wait for them to reach their adult morphology, because at 6 months, for instance, very often they are still too tiny to carry a pregnancy and especially to give birth to those kittens. So it's important to wait for them to reach the adult morphology before starting breeding them. That's really something important to keep in mind. Second question to focus on, in fact, it's not the question you need to focus on, it's what you need to focus on these individuals you would like to use for breeding. So in the male, I think there's one thing which is extremely important. Whatever happens, you need to check the feline leukemia and the feline immunodeficiency virus status of these individuals. So I know that typically breeders do that all the time, but I think it's important to reiterate the importance of this health check. These two diseases are a catastrophe if they enter the breeding cattery. They can totally ruin your breeding program. So don't hesitate to check all new breeding individuals you want to acquire, because again, these diseases can have a serious impact on your genetic selection program and on the reproductive parameters. In males, important to check their oral health. Why? Because when they breed, they will need to immobilize the female by biting the female at the neck level. So if they are in pain because they are inflamed gums or painful teeth, etc., they won't be able to do this this behavioral component of breeding. And this can be a reason why they won't be able to breed properly. So always check the oral health of your animals, especially your breeding individuals, before using them for breeding, because if it's not optimal, it might be interesting to go and see with your vet what can be done to make it optimal before using them, because that's clearly a critical parameter when it comes to breeding. And obviously, you need to check the testes. There are some defects called ectopic testis, cryptorchidism. It means that one or two testes is not present in the scrotum. You know that testes are typically outside of the body of the animal, and there's a reason for that. The formation of spermatozoa, what we call spermatogenesis, cannot occur at body temperature. So the testes need to be outside in this little push called the scrotum. If one is missing or even two are missing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are infertile, because there can still be some amount of spermatogenesis going on in the remaining testes, or even in both testes, depending on their location. But there are medical complications that can be related to this disorder. You have increased risk of testicular tumors. You have increased risk of testicular torsion. And more than that, for your breeding selection program, these disorders have a genetic background. So it is not recommended to use a male carrying this defect in a breeding program, because you might disseminate this disorder in your breeding population, and that's definitely not something you would like to do. So today, these individuals, when they show this defect, it is recommended to remove them from the breeding program. Typically, testes should be in the scrotum at birth in kittens. However, sometimes the migration of the testes can take a little bit longer. They should be in the scrotum at the time of weaning. If they are not at the scrotum at the time of weaning, it's important to check with your vet. If there's no emergency to treat it, there's no emergency to remove the testes whatsoever, but it's important to keep in mind that after 6 months of age, if they are not in the scrotum, the chances it reaches the scrotum are very, very, very low, and you will probably need to remove this individual from your breeding program. The penis is also something interesting to focus on when it comes to breeding cats, because take a look here. You see that the penis carries those penile spines, and those penile spines are in fact the reflection of the testosterone secretion. So basically, testosterone, is the main hormone which is required to produce spermatozoa. So if, for instance, this individual was castrated, you won't be able to see those penile spines. So that's also something interesting to check before using the animal for breeding. If you can check the presence of the penile spines, it will indicate that there is a normal testosterone secretion, and that from a hormonal standpoint, everything is in order, and you could use this animal for breeding. If those penile spines are missing at the time, there might definitely be an issue here, and that might not be an individual you should use for breeding. In the female, roughly the same thing. Again, check the FELV and FIV status. I cannot emphasize how important this is, because this is really a disease you don't want to get inside your cattery. Also check if there's any kind of vaginal discharge. The vagina in the queen is very short, 2 to 4 centimeter length. So vaginal diseases like vaginitis, infection of the vagina, are very, very, very rare in cats. So if you see any kind of vaginal discharge, it's abnormal. It often means that there is an infection, not of the vagina, but of the uterus. It's something we call a pyometra, so pus in the uterus. And each time you see a vaginal discharge in the queen, you need to have a veterinarian check this animal, just to make sure that there's no pyometra going on, and to take the right steps to keep this animal inside your breeding program. Many of those diseases, pyometra included, can today be treated medically. So if you think this is a valuable breeding individual, there are things that can be done, but you shouldn't wait too long. So always check if there's any kind of vaginal discharge before breeding the animal. In queens, it's totally uncommon. It's totally abnormal. Also check the mammary glands. For sure, mammary glands will be important at the time of lactation, because this is essential to make your life easier when it comes to rearing those kittens. However, there are some defects that can be found in the queen. So mammary tumors are certainly the most common issue you can find on a breeding queen, but this This comes late in life, typically in older individuals. There are some diseases that can be found in very young queens, and if you look at this picture here, you can see that the mammary glands here are hypertrophied, enlarged, and this is what we call a fibroadenomatosis. So this is not a mammary tumor. This is an hormonal disease that can be encountered in queens, especially in young queens at their first season very often. And this is an hormonal disease related to the secretion of progesterone. So here it's a very impressive case because you can see that it affects all the mammary glands, but sometimes only one mammary gland can be affected, etc. So it's always good to check this before breeding them, because if there's any kind of issue like that, again, there are some medical treatments. So it's better to treat this instead of trying to breed the queen, and that any breeding could potentially exacerbate all of these disorders. So again, check the mammary glands before breeding them. And something important in both males and females, always check their body condition. I'm sure you know that today in veterinary medicine, overweight/obesity is one of the biggest threats we face for our pets. And this is for sure a problem for pets that are not supposed to be bred, but this is also a problem for breeding individuals, because overweight tend to has an influence on fertility, because fat tissue produces hormones, and these hormones can interfere with the normal reproductive function. So here I show you a picture with a 5-grade scale to assess body condition in cats. There are also 9-grade scales that are available. But what I mean here is that you need to target the optimal body condition. And that's something you can discuss with your veterinarian. But it's important to be sure that before breeding them, your animals are in optimal body condition. That's a mandatory prerequisite to ensure optimal fertility in them. There are a few things you need to know also about the breeding season. So you know that there's a breeding season in cats. And typically this breeding season, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is based on the influence of daylight. So typically in your animals, in your cats, there's a small gland inside the brain that secretes an hormone called melatonin. And melatonin is secreted during the night. So the longer the nights, the more melatonin is secreted. So, and in cats, it's interesting. When you have a decrease in the secretion of the melatonin, so a modification of the secretion of the melatonin, this will influence the onset of the breeding season. So basically that means that when the daylight is increasing, this is a triggering factor to start the breeding season, especially in females. And depending on where you live on Earth, it can vary. For instance, if like me, you live in North America, the breeding season typically starts from January, beginning of February to end of September. If you live on the other side of the world, in the Southern Hemisphere, total opposite, because again, the seasons are the opposite. If you live in the intertropical region, lucky you first, but when it comes to feline reproduction, it means that there are very few variations in the daylight all year long. Your queens might cycle all year long. So that tells you something. The fact that queens respond somehow to light intensity mean that this is something that can be used inside your catteries to influence their breeding season. For instance, if the queens receive every day 12 hours of light per day, and in terms of intensity, you just need to be able to read properly your newspaper. If they receive this amount of light on a daily basis, they might cycle all year long. If they receive less than 8 hours of light per day, this might be sufficient to stop their breeding season. So that's why many breeders use light protocols to influence the breeding season of their animal. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as that, because other factors can influence the breeding season. The breed is one important one. Persians tend to really respond to light variations, while Other breeds like Orientals and Siamese tend not to respond so much to these variations. So again, you might find some individuals which are not responding at all to variations in light intensity. That's a possibility. Social interactions, as I mentioned before, is also something that can influence the breeding season. Remember, some individuals, if they are grouped out and they are highly stressed, because of this high stress, which leads to secretion of an hormone called cortisol, it can lead to a suppression and inhibition of all signs of seasons. So something to keep in mind, there are other factors as well that can influence the breeding season. Just something before I forgot, we always speak about that in females. In males, there are some publications that tend to tell us that there is an effect of the season of the light on the fertility parameters of the male, on the sperm production especially. But to tell the truth, if you collect semen in a male cat all year long, you will always find motile spermatozoas. So the limiting factor is really the female. If the female is in season, and the male breed the female. Typically, if the male has good semen quality, the female could get pregnant because the semen quality is maintains itself all year long in the males. So when it comes to the breeding season, from a clinical standpoint, I'm pretty sure you guys already noticed what it means when a queen is in season. They start meowing, they start rolling, cuddling, etc. So very, very clear clinical signs when they're in season, very hard to miss, except in certain cases, but we're going to discuss that. But typically, when they're in season, the ovaries are active. The ovaries secrete an hormone called estrogens, which in fact cause this behavioral modification you observe. And these estrogenic secretion lasts roughly 1 week, 10 days, 15 days, depending on the animals. You see that you might know that queens are what we call induced ovulators. So they will only secrete estrogens during their breeding season. They will start to secrete another hormone called progesterone only if they ovulate. And to ovulate, they need to be bred. But that's something we will discuss in a future webcast. So if they are not bred, they are in season and then they stop their season for a certain amount of time and then they will start again and again, all during the breeding season. And when the breeding season is over, this is what we call the winter anestrus. They will stop cycling and you will have no more sexual activity in these animals. But you can see that the inter-estrus period varies a lot depending on the breed. For instance, in average, in all queens, it's roughly 3 weeks. But if you breed Persians, for instance, look here. Sometimes some Persians will have an inter-estrus period of a year, which means that if you miss the breeding, you might have to wait 1 year before being able to breed them again. So again, it's very individual dependent, but it's good to know that the inter-estrus period is not something fixed. It can vary a lot depending on individuals, and the breed definitely plays a big role. On the opposite, if you breed Siamese Orientals, which is really the big opposite when it comes to reproductive function, in some of them, the inter-estrus interval is only 1 day. And when I was working at the vet faculty in Paris, many clients were calling me because their queens, it was like they were in permanent heats and they were not stopping. So they really wanted me to find a way to stop this because they couldn't sleep, basically. So as you can see, lots of variations depending on the breed. And basically, I think these are the most important thing to know before breeding your animals. So I will stop sharing my desktop and I will go back up to here. So hello again. So that's what I wanted to tell you, and I think these are really the important things to focus on before breeding a tomcat and a queen. So there are much more things we can look into, but I didn't want to be too overwhelming during this short webcast. If you want to learn more about feline reproduction, don't hesitate to visit my blog. Many informations you can find here, and don't hesitate to share your experience and send me your questions. I'll be more than happy to help you if I can. Again, it's a very small community, and the more people are working together, I think this is the best way to move forward. So I hope you learned a few things, and I hope to see you soon for the future webcast we will do on this topic. Thank you very much, and bye bye.